Good evening, and welcome to the Party for Clean Power. My name is Brandy Smith, and when I'm not serving as host for our annual fundraiser, I serve as Utah Clean Energy's Communications Director. Tonight, you're going to hear stories of local women leaders who are paving the way to a new energy era. You'll also hear from a few other of our team members to get just a glance at the latest and greatest from Utah Clean Energy's team of experts. And most importantly, we have a sneak peek of what's on deck to reduce emissions at an unprecedented scale in the coming years. But before all that, I want to take a moment to say thank you to the supporters and friends who made this virtual event possible. Our event and table sponsors. First, our co-host, the Nature Conservancy of Utah, a true ally in the work to turn the tide on climate change. And also Facebook. Their ardent commitment to power their operations with clean energy has brought new solar to Utah, totaling hundreds of megawatts of clean energy. Our newest partner, Clear Result, is helping people make smart energy decisions by combining innovative technology with energy efficiency solutions. And of course, Circ Energy, this renewable energy developer has geothermal, solar, and wind projects across the West. Holland & Hart, a longtime friend of Utah Clean Energy, has decades of power industry experience and is helping forge new paths for renewable energy in Utah. KW Engineering, these energy consultants know everything there is to know about sustainable building operations, from decarbonization, electrification, energy efficiency, and utility DSM support. Century Financial, who in addition to being one of Utah's savviest financial firms, continue to use their voice as advocates for clean air and climate solutions in Utah. And of course, the creative minds at Twig Media Lab, who continue to bring their imagination and storytelling to Utah Clean Energy's wonky work. And last but certainly not least, I want to thank our amazing table sponsors who brought so many of you here tonight. Thank you to everyone who has shown up so generously for our climate and to help us celebrate women leaders in climate change. Tonight, we are hoping to raise $75,000 to support local climate solutions. Throughout the next hour, I hope that you'll be inspired to at some point hit the donate button on the right of your screen. So with that, let's get this party started. I'm going to hand things over to our Executive Director, Sarah Wright.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Sarah Wright, the Executive Director for Utah Clean Energy. It would have been nice if we could have been here together, but the virtual world does have its benefits. It's enabled us to bring in one of my heroes, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. She'll inspire us and help us reflect on hope and healing in this divided world. This has been a tough year, a tough summer, and most of us are feeling the weight of climate change. I know you don't need to be reminded of the drought, the wildfires, the hurricanes, or the UN climate report's code red for humanity. We are all living it. Together, we're facing unprecedented challenges. The point of tonight is to know that we can do something about it, and also for us to celebrate what we are already accomplishing as a community. Admittedly, I eat, drink, and sleep climate. Not exactly the healthiest combination, and it doesn't make me the life of the party. I know that we need to move.
You are the life of the party, Sarah.
I know we need to move fast and with conviction. But I do have some good news. We are on the precipice of major shifts. We have the technology, we have changing political will, and we have surging momentum to turn the tide on climate. And that, my friends, is what this night is about. To remind us that we have the solutions and that together we can do extraordinary things. I'm honored to have you be part of this work. There is no one way to fix the climate. And there is no one role for you to play in advancing solutions. This is exemplified by the three women we are honoring tonight, each taking a different path. I'm excited to kick off tonight's Party for Clean Power by honoring these amazing women climate leaders and sharing their stories with you.
The mountains and the outdoor lifestyle really captured my imagination from a young age. Being outside made me want to become a climate activist because clean air, clean water, and a stable climate, those things are non-negotiable. I always knew that with my career, I wanted to make a difference and try to make the world a better place.
We're here for the Climate March.
My name is Kate Bowman. I'm the Renewable Energy Program Manager for Utah Clean Energy. The kind of work that I do is in the policy and regulatory arena. I met Caroline because we're both backcountry skiers. Caroline sees that you can solve problems differently and that you don't necessarily have to be an expert in order to use your voice and to have an impact.
We are going to support the youth climate leaders who are organizing the climate strike.
As an athlete, Caroline has an opportunity to really tell a story about climate change to people who don't spend a lot of time thinking about climate, from Congress and legislators to the brands that she's working with to followers on social media.
What democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like. A lot of climate policy, it's not always the easiest to understand, and sometimes the conversations that we have can be really difficult. But when you start them over that shared love of the outdoors, it's just something that unites us all as humans. When you learn more about what's causing the climate crisis, you realize, yes, we need individuals, but we also need systems to change. And so I became a lot more involved in policy at the city, state, and federal levels.
She's never willing to settle, and she's always there asking, what's next? How do we get around this? She helps people see that their voice is important and that they can be part of the solution. Utah Clean Energy was one of the nonprofits that was chosen to benefit from this race that happens every year called the Up for Air series. It was a virtual challenge, and you could set your own challenge to pick something that was meaningful to you.
I climbed and skied 31,000 vertical feet in a day, just a little over the elevation of Everest, which is 29,029 feet.
Caroline setting her own Up for Air challenge really gave the race a lot of momentum, and we started seeing more people creating their own challenges to do their own Up for Air races. It was really exciting to see the energy that picked up throughout the day as people were seeing what she was doing on social media. We started seeing donations roll in. One thing that I'm so impressed by is that she's had to overcome a lot of stereotypes about women in the outdoor industry. To see her overcome that criticism and overcome that doubt and accomplish what she knows she's capable of, that has translated into making her a really powerful climate advocate. Because when people say the climate challenge is too big or it's too difficult or the solutions are too hard, she's always there asking how to move past that doubt and uncertainty.
The most important thing is to show up and speak up for those big changes, because that's where we'll really make a difference in the climate crisis.
My name is Christine Michael, and I develop renewable energy projects across the Intermountain West in solar and wind and battery storage. The name Enyo, if you Google it, it means goddess of war. For 15 or 16 years, it was this constant battle to have people understand the importance of renewables.
Christine and I first met, I think, at the energy office where she was just starting. At that time, there was no renewable energy in the state.
When you said it to somebody, they weren't exactly sure what it meant because it was such a small percentage of electricity that we used. At that time in 2001, it was right before the Olympics, and our mascots were powder, copper, and coal. And so I thought, perfect, I'll be able to be part of that energy transition. When I first met Sarah, she was forming Utah Clean Energy, and suddenly I had a partner that I could work on these programs. It was very much an organic beginning for both of us.
Christine and renewable energy developers across the country are a big part of the solution to climate change because What causes climate change is the burning of fossil fuels, and renewable energy has no pollution. 20 years ago, over 95% of our electricity in Utah was served by coal-fired power plants. And Christine's beginning work planted the seeds for renewable energy. Just her dogged determination to build projects. She built the first project in Utah, which opened up the state for other projects. And now we have enough renewable energy installed in the state to power nearly 1 million homes, and that's just the beginning. She just continues to do the hard work that it takes to develop renewable energy projects in Utah and the West.
What I'd been doing for so long, which was pushing the utility to buy my power, there was this pull of people wanting power. Some of the projects that I'm most proud of include the Spanish Fork Wind Project, which was the first operating wind project in the state of Utah. More recently, several of my projects are in construction right now. They will supply entities like the Salt Lake City Corporation, which will now receive 90% of its annual electricity from my solar project. Utah Valley University will get 97% of its power from a solar project. The University of Utah will get 71% of its power from a solar project I developed. And then half of the homes in Platte River Power Authority's communities will be powered with wind energy.
It's always easier just to follow the status quo. And if you want to break out in a new direction, for Christine and for others, it's really breaking out towards climate solutions and clean energy. You have to be tenacious and have the leadership to figure out how to put it all together to show that we can do things in a different way.
Maybe I could take the whole interview to just talk about the cool things that Salt Lake City is doing about climate change.
Newly elected mayor of Salt Lake City,
Erin Mendenhall.
Erin Mendenhall.
Erin Mendenhall.
I'm Erin Mendenhall. I'm the mayor of Salt Lake City, mother to 3 awesome kids, wife to Kyle, and I like to ride bikes. My motivation to get into the field of air quality was when I became a new mother, and seeing the world through that new lens, I threw myself into it and started as an activist, standing, outside with hundreds of others sometimes just a handful, posters in hand, trying to have our voices heard. I think anybody who starts as an activist and maybe turns to advocacy and then to policy making still has activism in their core. I know it is there for me.
Of the state of Utah.
My name is Kevin Emerson, and I am Utah Clean Energy's Building Efficiency and Decarbonization Program Director. Cutting energy waste is a really important part of reducing climate emissions. Buildings are complicated. There's so much energy consumption in our built environment, and Mayor Mendenhall got that.
We worked with Utah Clean Energy when I was on the city council to figure out how do we focus in on those buildings which might benefit the most from the resources to help them run more efficiently.
Salt Lake City had the opportunity to become the 25th city across the entire country to adopt an innovative ordinance to help the largest buildings become aware of their energy waste and to cut their energy waste.
Utah Clean Energy came to the table really unafraid, but willing to provide the kind of business resources in terms of how do you talk to business owners and property owners about why this is good for them. It's not just about air quality and the climate. It ended up passing successfully, and it's been now at play for several years.
Mayor Mendenhall is visionary. She's willing to listen. She wants to take bold ideas and move them forward to really address climate change.
You can't do air quality work without simultaneously doing climate change work. They're inextricably connected. The work on equity and environmental justice is also inextricably connected. So moving from a focus, as I started on air quality, to clean energy, to food equity, and everything else that we do around renewable resources and planning for the future of our city was a very natural progression. Some of the things I'm most proud of Salt Lake City doing in the last couple of years is around the 100% renewable energy path that we've now created. It's called the Community Renewable Energy Plan. I'm also proud of our 1,000 Trees initiative on the west side of Salt Lake City. We're still planting about 1,100 trees a year throughout our city. When I came into office, we committed to increasing that 1,100 to about 2,200 and focusing that additional 1,000 on our west side. We're now 1,500 trees in. We'll put the next 500 for this year in the fall.
What makes Mayor Mendenhall a great advocate, and what has made her a great advocate over the years for clean energy, clean air, and climate is her pragmatism, her vision. She's patient, but she's also finding ways to move things quickly. She's great at building bridges and building connections with people.
I want young people to see themselves in my role. I want them to see themselves running the Department of Environmental Quality, being a governor. So please see yourself in these roles in the future, but don't hesitate to be involved today.
She uses the power of her position to bring lasting, long-term benefits to our local community, our local environment, our public health, and our planet's climate.
From all of us at Utah Clean Energy, congratulations and a big thank you to our women climate leaders for all that you do. My name is Rebecca Tietza, and in addition to my job as Assistant Director here at Utah Clean Energy, I am a proud mother of two and a child rights advocate. But this past year has been pretty sobering when I think about what the future holds for my children. Over 2.2 billion children across the globe are already experiencing environmental hazards due to climate change. And even here in Utah, children are starting to feel these risks. Climate change is much more than just an environmental issue or a public health issue. It's a children's rights issue, and it's by far the most significant threat that our children face. But we can do something about this. It might sound simple, but speaking about climate change in your community and holding your local and federal leaders responsible for their action or inaction on climate change are two of the most impactful things that you can do. We must act quickly and with courage, combining our hope with action. Utah Clean Energy is doing just that, and we want to share a few of these stories with you. Take a look.
My name's Josh Kraft, and I'm Utah Clean Energy's Government and Corporate Relations Manager, and we're here on this smoky day at the state capitol, where I do most of my work.
And I'm Ofa Matangi, the newest member to Utah Clean Energy's team.
I don't think that anyone can deny that we are living through extraordinary times. Look around us, look at the newspapers, the evidence of the climate crisis is everywhere, and that can make our work challenging and frustrating. At the same time, the momentum for change is unprecedented. Utah hasn't always been at the center of national climate policy. It wasn't that long ago that climate change felt like a four-letter word up here at the state capitol, and we're changing all that. We helped launch the Utah Climate and Clean Air Compact, which is bringing together business, community, and faith leaders to understand the urgency of this challenge and to come up with solutions to address it.
And although the momentum is definitely building around climate action, we need to remember that many of our communities bear the brunt of climate change, and at the same time have the least access to climate solutions, solar panels, electric vehicles, and efficient housing. These inequities really hit home for me. As a community activist and growing up in West Valley City, I've seen how a changing climate and pollution affects Utah's diverse communities, as well as those living in my ancestral home of the islands of Tonga. Climate change is reshaping our world and our communities, and we know that this is just the beginning.
I truly believe that Utah can be the conservative state that leads on climate solutions. Collectively, we can be doing so much more, but the key right now is to seize the moment and put climate at the center of our policy decisions.
It's going to take all of us, Utah's political, business, and community leaders, all recognizing the urgency and working together to solve truly the greatest environmental crisis of our generation. As we work to bring all these pieces together on the national front, at the local level, Utah Clean Energy will make sure that we're not leaving our most vulnerable communities behind. And we hope you'll join us in this work.
Thank you, Ofa and Josh. Now, if you know anything about Utah Clean Energy, you know that we are utility geeks. Our team has been working on decarbonizing the energy grid longer than anyone in Utah. Take it from Hunter Holman, who's coming up next. The work is worth it.
Hi, I'm Hunter Holman, Utah Clean Energy staff attorney. A lot of people ask me what I do for Utah Clean Energy, and I have a bad habit of diving straight into the weeds and starting to talk about regulatory interventions and rate cases, and it's not too long before I start to see their eyes glaze over and I've lost them. But really what I do for Utah Clean Energy boils down to places like this. It's a solar farm in Salt Lake City, Utah, one of several renewable energy projects that have come online in the last few years, and I'm proud to say that Utah Clean Energy has had a hand in helping them get built. We have made a lot of progress in terms of building renewable energy resources over the last few years, but we are not transitioning fast enough or at the scale and pace necessary to adequately respond to climate change. And Utah still has one of the largest coal fleets in the entire country. The recent UN report on climate change didn't pull any of its punches. We have less than 10 years to totally revamp our energy supply. We have to do this, and we can do this, because we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to totally change the way that we generate and use energy in Utah. Recently, Utah Clean Energy's work on the utility resource planning process helped get Rocky Mountain Power to pledge to build over 5,000 megawatts of clean energy resources. That's new wind, new solar, and battery storage for the first time in Utah. That is a huge, unprecedented amount of renewable energy in Utah. Now we're in the next phase of utility resource planning. We're working hard to move Utah away from emitting resources like coal and gas and towards cutting-edge clean energy resources. These are the kinds of resources that will help modernize Utah's energy grid, make it more resilient and better able to respond to extreme weather events. There is no doubt that we have our work cut out for us. Given the urgency, there's no time like the present to start this work. It is such an exciting time to be working on these issues with such wonderful people. And I know that for me and for everyone else working at Utah Clean Energy, we are not going to let this opportunity pass us by.
Hi everyone, and thank you for tuning in this evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Anna Zanetti, and I am the Director of Development for Utah Clean Energy. I just had my 1-year anniversary with the organization, and I feel so fortunate to work with such an impactful team. Hopefully by now, you've got a taste of some of the work and successes that have been underway at Utah Clean Energy. But we are now in the climate decade. Utah Clean Energy has our sights set on the future with the launch of one of our most ambitious efforts to date. We're going electric.
Climate change is hitting us hard. We know it can feel discouraging and overwhelming, but we do have the power to change things. We have the momentum to make extraordinary changes. Every day across the U.S., new wind turbines are going up, solar farms are soaking up the sun, and geothermal plants are churning out power. These renewables are changing the balance of where our energy comes from. Out with coal-fired power plants and in with this. At the same time, we are switching to clean electric vehicles, putting solar on our homes, and making our buildings ultra-efficient and climate-friendly. And Utah Clean Energy has led the way, a driving force in the West, paving the way for this clean energy transformation. Now it's time to take things to the next level. In our homes and buildings, we have two sources of power. One powers things like lights, computers, microwaves. This source is what Utah Clean Energy is working to switch from coal to renewables. But the other powers our stoves, fireplaces, and water heaters. It's natural gas, and it sends massive amounts of greenhouse gas emissions into our atmosphere each year. This is a no-go for a healthy climate. Next, we need to accelerate, and I mean really accelerate the switch to electric vehicles. When we stop burning fossil fuels in our cars and trucks, we tackle the biggest source of emissions in the U.S. So, Utah Clean Energy is switching things up. It's called Electrification. And believe it or not, you're gonna love it! Going renewable and all electric can help cut emissions at the speed and rate needed to turn the tide on climate change. How? We make the switch to electric. Our cooking, our water heaters, our laundry, using heat pumps to heat and cool our homes. It can all go electric. You pair that with making our cars electric, pollution-free, and oh so fun to drive. We're launching the next phase of a new energy era. Join us and make it electric.
Now is the time to think big. Your support tonight will reduce emissions in Utah and the West at a scale and pace the climate crisis requires of us. We can and we must do this, but we need your support. Our goal is to raise $75,000 this evening. If you have not done so already, please consider donating to Utah Clean Energy right now on the side of your screen. A donation of $5,000, $1,000, $100, or $50, every gift truly makes a difference. Utah Clean Energy is committed to putting your donations to extraordinary use by turning the tide on climate change now and for future generations. You get the idea. Every dollar goes towards a healthy future. From all of us at Utah Clean Energy, thank you for your generosity, support, and ongoing involvement with the organization. We could not do this work without you. Thank you.
And now to the highlight of the evening, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, who the New York Times calls the nation's most effective communicator on climate change. Hayhoe has been profiled in the New York Times, the Washington Post, People, and even Rolling Stone. She is a Canadian climate scientist and evangelical Christian. She's the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy. She's the United Nations Champion of the Earth and the face of a multi-million-dollar ad campaign, Science Moms. We are delighted to have her joining us tonight. Welcome, Dr. Hayhoe. Now I'm going to ask you to bear with us for the next 30 to 60 seconds while we let technology be technology. We're going to pull in a separate live Zoom feed with Dr. Hayhoe. But while we're doing that, I'm going to remind you to please put your questions for Dr. Hayhoe in the chat. After her talk, we're going to open things up for a Q&A moderated by one of Utah Clean Energy's team. So again, give us 30 to 60 seconds. If you do not see Dr. Hayhoe by then, maybe give us a quick refresh on your browser, and we'll see you soon.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our keynote talk and our Q&A featuring Dr. Katharine Hayhoe. My name is Jeff Busan. I am the Climate Program Manager with Utah Clean Energy. And it is my great pleasure to be serving as moderator for tonight's Q&A. In addition to the extraordinary accomplishments you just heard about, Dr. Hayhoe has just released the book, Saving Us, a climate scientist's case for hope and health in a divided world. Before I hand things over, I just wanted to remind you all to submit your questions in the chat. Following Dr. Hayhoe's talk, I will be returning to get through as many of your questions as possible. And with that, welcome, Dr. Hayhoe.
Thank you so much. It is great to be with you virtually. So climate change, it's something that a lot of us think about. We may be even very worried about it, but we don't know what to do. Over the last few years, the number one question that I've gotten from almost anyone, anywhere, whoever I talk to is, what gives you hope? I figure if I, a climate scientist, can find hope, anybody can. So that's why I wrote Saving Us. Why did I call it Saving Us? Let me actually start my slides here so you can see them. I called it, here we go. I called it Saving Us because so often we hear that it's about saving the planet, right? It's not about saving the actual planet. The actual planet will be orbiting the sun long after we're gone. What we're talking about is we are talking about every living thing that lives on this planet, especially us. We cannot float around in outer space without the resources this planet provides. When we're talking about climate change, the polar bears are on the front lines and we are right behind them. How is climate change affecting us? The biggest way it's doing so is by loading the weather dice against us, taking issues like droughts and heat waves and making them bigger and stronger, longer, and more dangerous. We are seeing this right now in Madagascar. We experienced it just this past summer out west. We know that hurricanes are getting bigger, dumping a lot more rain along the coast. And of course, in Utah, there's drought, massive drought. The drought is making air pollution worse. And the wildfire smoke is choking the air as well. And then what about the winter tourism industry? It's also being affected too. The holiday ski season is getting more unpredictable, and more of our precipitation is falling as rain and less as snow. Why do we care? It's because it affects every part of our lives. Climate change affects the water that we drink. It affects the air that we breathe. It affects the food that we grow and we eat. It even affects our buildings and roads and infrastructure that we don't often think about, but that makes our lives today possible. To care about climate change, we don't have to be a certain type of person or live a certain type of place or vote a certain type of way. We only have to be one thing. And that one thing is a human being living on this planet. And you know what? We are all that. It's no wonder that our worry has reached an all-time high. Just last week, new survey results showed that 70% of people in the United States are now worried about climate change, and that is an all-time high. But when we survey people, 50% of us feel helpless. 50% of us don't know where to start when it comes to climate action. So the biggest problem we have are not the few loud voices who continue to claim that this isn't real. And believe me, I meet every single one of them on social media almost every day. But they're not our biggest problem. The biggest problem we have is that the majority of us are worried about this, but we feel hopeless and helpless. We don't know what to do. What we're missing is something called efficacy. Efficacy is the simple idea that if I do something, can I make a difference? If we do something, can we make a difference? Efficacy is what we most lack when it comes to climate change. In other words, we picture climate action as a giant boulder like this, sitting at the bottom of a steep cliff. Now, yes, I know this man's not really pushing the boulder, but it illustrates the point. A giant boulder sitting at the bottom of a steep cliff with only one or two or three hands trying to get it up the hill that will never succeed. And we imagine that if we added our hand, it would make no difference at all. But that's not what's really happening. What is really happening when we start to look around us at everything that people are doing to help fix climate change, we realize that that giant boulder is already at the top of the hill. It is already rolling down the hill in the right direction. And it doesn't just have one or two hands on it, it has millions of hands on it. And a lot of those hands come from people in Utah. Climate action is already underway. That boulder is already rolling down the hill. It already has millions of hands on it. And when you add yours and when I add mine, it goes a little bit faster. And when you get your place of work involved, when you get people you know involved, when you get your neighborhood, your city, when you get other people involved and they add their hands, it goes even faster. So yes, we absolutely have efficacy. We are already changing the world. We just need more. And isn't that a very different picture? As Greta Thunberg said, the one thing we need more than hope is action, because once we start to act, hope is everywhere. So if you feel depressed about climate change, if you feel anxious, if you feel fearful, and we all do, I ask people all the time, how do you feel about climate change? And these are the words I hear. Hope is not going to find you, but you can find it. How do you find it? By going out and doing something. Like what? Well, we can start really small and really simple, because the number one thing we're not doing is we're not talking about it. A new survey just came out last week that showed that 14% of us are talking about climate change. 14%, that's it. Only 14% of people are talking about it because we don't think it matters to us. We don't know how to communicate it to others, and we don't think there's anything positive we can do to fix it. If we have talked about climate change, it typically looks something like this. Climate changes and we get worried. And who wouldn't be worried when we see what's happening to our world? We look around and we feel like people aren't moving fast enough. So what do? We load up all of the scary data and facts that we can gather, we pile it all up, and we dump it on them. Surely, if this won't motivate them to change, what will? But here's where our human psychology kicks in. As I talk about in the book, fear certainly wakes us up. But then what do? If we don't know what to do about it, our defense mechanisms kick in. And you know what they do? They turn it off. People reject it even more, and inaction results. As neuroscience tells us, Tali Sherrod is a neuroscientist. She says, fear and anxiety cause people, she's not speaking about climate change here, she's just speaking about how our brains work in general. Fear and anxiety cause us to withdraw, to freeze, to give up, rather than take action. And so what happens? Climate just changes more. Okay, so if this doesn't work, then why am I telling people to talk about climate change? It's because there's a different way. How do I talk about this to people? This is the second most common question I get. The first is, what gives you hope? And the second is, how do I talk about it? And that's why I wrote the book. First of all, I want to emphasize, I'm not talking about having positive, constructive conversations with the 7%ers. Who are they? I have a figure that shows them. Actually, they're 8%ers. Dismissive people will dismiss 200 years of science. They'll dismiss 2,000 climate scientists. They'll dismiss 2 million scientific studies. They will dismiss everything. But you know what? They're only 8% of the population. I know their voices are loud. Again, we see them every day on social media. But dismissives, who I personally define as people who, if an angel from God with brand new tablets of stone appeared before them that say global warming is real in foot-high letters of flame, they still wouldn't change their minds. If that wouldn't change their mind, we can't either, but that's okay. 92% of us are not dismissive, and 70% of us are already worried about this. So that's where we can have the positive, constructive conversations. How? Don't start with something that you disagree with people on, and certainly don't start by judging or guilting them. Somebody once said to me just the other day, they said, well, how do I tell my neighbor to stop flying? I said, you don't. Have a conversation instead about something that you both care about. Are you both parents? Do you both care about the air that your kids are breathing in? Are you cyclists and you're worried about the air quality as you bike to work? Do you love skiing and you're worried about the snow? Do you have military experience? Do you really enjoy food and cooking? Whoever you are, you have different unique aspects to who you are, what you love, what you care about, that you can connect to other people with who also care about the same things. So figure out what it is they care about. And if you don't know, ask and listen to their answers. And then begin the conversation with something you agree on. Connect the dots to why climate change matters. And then do not end without inspiring with a positive, constructive solution on how you can tackle this problem. What types of things have I bonded with people over? Well, I'm a scientist, so I definitely can bond with people over science. I'm also a mom, so I can bond with fellow parents and people who care about their kids. I teach. I love skiing. I live in Texas. I'm from Canada. I love to travel. I knit. I like to cook. I garden too. These are all things that I've started conversations with because climate change affects everything and everyone. But remember, efficacy. How do we know that we can make a difference? When we look at what other people are doing. So let me show you a few of the hands that are on that boulder, okay? Did you know that there are countries on that boulder? Entire countries. Did you know that there are companies whose hands are on that boulder? Big, giant companies. Did you know that there are many, many churches whose hands are on that boulder? Many of them. In fact, my good news from yesterday, I go out and I look for hope every day because it won't find you, but you can find it if you look for it. I found out that the Presbyterian Church of Ireland had a vote at their General Assembly yesterday to divest from fossil fuels, that is to take their investments out of fossil fuels. And in the speech that the minister read to the General Assembly before they voted, She actually quoted from Saving Us. She said that because climate change affects the poorest and most vulnerable people in the world, we as Christians are called to love our neighbors as ourselves. And today that means climate action. It's a true expression of who we are and what we believe. We know, of course, that young people are speaking out. Their hands are all over that giant boulder, pushing it down the hill. We know that our own lives are changing and each of us can add our hand. I love my solar panels and my plug-in car. I try out new plant-based recipes with my family. I swapped out all our light bulbs and I significantly reduced our food waste because that's a big source of heat trapping gas emissions. Plus, it's just a waste of money. I love telling people about it too, because it isn't just about doing it. It's about talking about it. It's about sharing how it makes you feel, how it might make you feel empowered or activated, or just happy that you were able to do something that was consistent with your values. I love talking about what happens in the places where I live. I live in Texas, where 23% of our energy comes from clean sources. They're building the biggest solar-powered solar array just outside of Dallas right now. But you know what? You're doing it in Utah too. Solar development in southern Utah, children striking at the Capitol, LDS Earth Stewardship Committee, and of course, Utah Climate and Clean Air Compact. This organization is specifically focusing on getting the conversation going between businesses, community members, churches, elected officials. They're getting everybody talking about climate change because climate change matters to everyone. You only have to be a human living on planet Earth, but if you live in Utah, how much more so, right? I love talking to you about how the world is changing. Did you know that 90% of new energy installed around the world last year was clean energy? 90%. Some of it in the poorest countries in the world that don't have oil or gas or coal, but they have a lot of sun and a lot of wind, and it is changing their lives. Where do we start? How do we add our hand to this boulder? By doing the thing that most of us are not doing. By talking about it. By talking about why it matters to us and what we can do to fix it. So that's why when I did a TED Talk, I said the most important thing you can do about climate change is talk about it. And you know what I just realized? I have literally not worn this jacket since I did that TED Talk because I figured everybody would see it. And then tonight I was like, oh, I really want to wear the jacket again. And I did. So that is the same jacket, but believe me, I do have more than one. So how do we talk about climate change? Well, climate changes and we get worried, right? But here's where we break the cycle. Instead of loading up all the scary facts, which are true, believe me, they're all true. I'm a scientist, I know. What do? We talk about why it matters to us, where we live in Utah in ways that matter to our lives and to theirs. And we talk about positive, constructive solutions. What happens? People feel empowered. Action results. And what does neuroscience tell us? Let's go back to that. Our brain is built to associate forward action with a reward, not avoiding harm. So reframe your message so that the information you provide induces hope, not dread. That is how we can make a difference. And what happens when we talk about climate change? We knock over the first domino that leads us to that better future. I want to conclude with a thought on how change happens. Our world has changed before. Our industrialized society has changed in radical ways over the last 200 years. How did that change happen? As I wrote for an essay I just wrote for Time magazine a little while ago, these are my words, change did not begin with the King of England deciding to end slavery, or the President of the United States giving women the vote, just waking up one morning and deciding, oh, I'll just give them the vote, or with the National Party of South Africa opting to end apartheid out of the goodness of their hearts. No, change began when ordinary people of no particular power or wealth or fame, decided that the world could and should be different. Who were these people? We know a few of their names, but only a few. There are thousands whose names we do not know, but they shared and supported and fought for those visions of a better world. They were people who had the courage of their convictions, who used their voices to advocate for the systemic societal changes needed. We, Us ordinary people, we are the people who changed the world before, and we are the same people who can change it again. Why? Because what's at stake for us is everything. It really is about saving us. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Dr. Hayhoe. And I know a lot of folks in the audience are eager to hear more from you, so I'm going to kick it off with the first question. And you pretty much got to this already, but I did want to start off by saying, or set this up by saying, Utah is without a doubt one of the most conservative states in the country, making climate a very tricky topic to navigate. And as a fellow climate communicator, climate change, those words can be a trigger and folks will shut down. So for our guests here tonight, would you be so kind as to provide us some recommendations and guidance on how to navigate through some really tough conversations around climate change with policymakers or business leaders or community members?
Or anyone.
Yeah.
Yes, our family members, our next door neighbor. So I live in Lubbock, Texas. And the last time they surveyed cities around the United States, Lubbock, Texas is the second most conservative city in the whole country. When there's an election, we have the Democrat candidate and we have the Republican candidate. And then we have the conservative Republican candidate that spends all their time talking about what a tool of the government the Republican candidate is. Guess which city is number one? Provo, Utah. So yes, so I come from the same type of place. And I have learned that if I can talk about climate change here, you can talk about where you are too. How do we do it? We don't have to use the words climate and change. In fact, I've given entire presentations and talks without ever mentioning climate and change together. In my book, I talk about it. One time, the first time I decided to do this, I was speaking to a group of about 300 water managers. And up before me was a state representative who explicitly rejects the reality of climate change. Up before him, another state official who explicitly rejects the reality of climate change. And then there was me, the climate scientist. So I figured, what do I have to lose? I'm going to talk all about what's happening, how our heavy precipitation is getting more intense, our droughts are longer and stronger, how it's getting warmer, so more water is evaporating out of our reservoirs, and we have to prepare for a water scarce future. But I'm never going to mention climate change. And at the end of the talk, I will never forget, a woman came running up to me and she grabbed my hand and she shook it enthusiastically. And she said, "That was fantastic. I agree with everything you said." And then she said, "Those people who talk about global warming, I don't agree with them at all." My mind sort of boggled because, of course, that was exactly what I talked about, but I'd never said the words. And then she went on, she said, "But this makes sense." So what happened? Because I didn't mention the trigger words, she actually listened to what I was saying and she agreed with it. Because she's a human, she lives in Texas, she cares about our future. We were able to build that shared connection because I didn't even mention the words. And so that is totally fine. We do not have to mention the words, but what we do have to do, we have to begin with something that we agree on. We must. And if we don't know what that is, we need to think about it. We need to ask them more about their life. We need to find out more about them. And sometimes we might never find something. And if we don't, we're not the right person to have that conversation. That's okay. There's other people who will. But when you do find that connection, whether you both, come from the same place, you both have lived through similar experiences, you are both absolutely passionate about fishing, whatever it is, then connect the dots to how climate change is affecting what you both care about and bring in a positive, constructive solution. And Utah is full of them, of course, that you can share with them and say, "Isn't this amazing? Aren't you on board with this?" And they might be like, "Yes, I totally am." So that's how you do it. And trust me, if you can do it in Texas, you can do it everywhere.
That's great advice. And it does remind me, one of my favorite quotes in your book is when you were talking with a farmer, I believe, he said, I hear what you're saying and that this is resonating with me, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but Al Gore believes this. So I can't believe that. So I'm butchering this, of course, but that was one of my favorite parts. And I didn't know if you wanted to follow up on that in terms of just that quick anecdote.
Sure. So that was where I was talking to a group of farmers, and it actually happened before the water managers. So I had said the words climate change, and a farmer came up to me afterwards, and farmers are very shrewd people. They follow the weather carefully. They understand natural variability. They know it's getting hotter and drier. And he said to me, "Everything you said makes sense, and I would like to agree with you, but I can't, because if I agree with you, then I have to agree with Al Gore, and I can never do that." But that's why it's so important to talk about solutions. Because, and probably my favorite story in the book is the story of John and his dad. His dad, this is a story from Australia. And believe me, people are like this in Australia. They're like this in Canada, where I'm from. They're like this in the UK. John had a dad. You may have a dad too. You may have an uncle, you may have a cousin, you may have a neighbor, but John had a dad. And every time John went home for dinner, his dad would be like, well, John, there's more polar bears now than there ever have been. So how can you say that the Arctic sea ice is melting? And I heard that those scientists are just making it all up anyways, and it's all a volcano. Don't you know that? And so John took this so seriously that he went back to university and he got a PhD in cognitive psychology. He became a global expert in misinformation, and he has an amazing YouTube channel called Cranky Uncle. It's all about COVID misinformation and climate misinformation. Check it out. He even illustrates it himself. He's an amazing cartoonist too. So he becomes a global expert. He writes the scientific studies. He creates the website Skeptical Science that has answers to all the common questions about climate change. Do you think that changes his father's mind? No, it does not. Why? Because more and more facts were not the problem. The problem is his dad didn't think there were any solutions that were consistent and compatible with his values. His dad was a fiscal conservative, though. He liked to pinch his pennies and he liked to be independent. So along came a rebate on solar panels in the rural area where John's dad lived. He crunched the numbers. He figured out how much money he would save. He got the panels. He started to save even more money. Pretty soon, every month, he'd be sending John his power bill saying, look how much money I saved on my solar panels. And then after about a year or two, John said he was sitting down with his dad, and out of nowhere, his dad said, oh, global warming. I've always thought that was real. And John said, even with his PhD, he said he just about fell off his chair. He said he felt like he was living in an alternate universe. Not only had his father changed his mind, he had forgotten that he had ever rejected the science. What changed his mind? The fact that he was able to be part of the solution. He was able to be a good guy. He didn't have to be a bad guy, imagining there were no solutions other than destroying the economy and, voting against all his ideals. He was able to be a good guy because he was part of the solution. And he was going around telling everybody what a fantastic thing it was to do this. And of course, global warming was real. So we can do that too. And we spread the good news about what real climate solutions look like for Utah. They clean up our air immediately. They help clean up our water. They invest in nature. They help protect our industry. They're good for people's health. They're good for our infrastructure. They're good for the economy. They're good for everything that makes Utah what it is. And so that's why it just makes sense.
These are the kind of stories that I crave. Thank you very much for sharing that. We have a question from Julie. Julie asks, how can we apply the social and behavioral sciences more effectively to help us with getting people to join our efforts to get greenhouse gas emissions down as soon as possible?
I love that you asked that question because I am a physical scientist myself. So my background is in physics and atmospheric science. So when I started to talk to people about climate change, guess what I did? I gave them science, 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 more science in the middle, and ended with science, science, science. I gave them all the facts, and it just wasn't getting through. People might find it interesting, but they were like, so what? Who cares? So then I realized there had to be more. So I started looking, and about that time, people were starting to research this. They were starting to research how would you communicate effectively about climate change. So I started to read about it. I was like, oh, they say that you're supposed to frame it around shared values. Never thought about that one before. And then yeah, exactly. And then they're like, and most of the objections are solution aversion because people don't think you can fix it. I'm like, really? Well, I guess I better start learning more about solutions so I can mention what those look like to people. The social science is so important, but it can be boiled down to what I talked about tonight. Start with something that you have in common, something that you share. Connect the dots to how climate change affects us here and now in ways that are relevant to us. Not the future, not far away, not ways that only matter to those people, but not us. Here, now, and relevant to us. And then always, always, always talk about positive, constructive solutions that might be something you do yourself, something your city's doing, your school is doing, your place of worship is doing, a company is doing. Talk about solutions and use your voice wherever you are, where you work, where you play, where you live, the places you love. Use your voice to advocate for change, because how does change happen? How does a company decide to set a net zero goal? It isn't because the president of the company wakes up one day and decides to. It was because people inside the company talked about it. Why is Salt Lake City, why does it have such a good climate action plan? It wasn't because a single mayor decided that they had to. It was because people in the city worked towards it for years. Our voice is the most powerful thing that we have, and we can use it so effectively. But the reason I wrote my book, or I should say, and the reason I wrote my book, is because that understanding how to do it matters. And so that's what I talk about in the book. How do we use everything we know about the social science to be effective messengers? Because you know what? Scientists are very trusted messengers, but there's one category that is more trusted than scientists. It's you. People who you know, colleagues, acquaintances, friends, family, you are more trusted than me because you speak the same language, you live in the same place, you have the same experiences. You are the best person to have this conversation.
I have to ask this question from Carolyn Gleick, who's one of tonight's climate champions. It's a great question. From Carolyn Gleick, Dr. Hayhoe, will you come skiing with me?
I've seen your photos on Instagram, so I will say, as long as I don't have to hike to the top of the mountain, I will ski down with you. I know what you climb. I've seen the pictures.
We have a question from Kat. Kat asks, what do you recommend on explaining to others that even the smallest actions make a difference? Yes, we can connect on what we have in common, but so many feel like they can't make a difference because it is too big of an effort.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly how people feel. Exactly. And that, again, is exactly what my book is about. So I want to share one more story, probably my second favorite story in the book. I don't want to give them all away because there's a lot more. This is a story about a man called Glenn. So my TED Talk, the one where I was wearing this jacket, was released in December 2018. And in May, the following year, so 5 months later, 5 or 6 months later, I was giving a talk at a university. And as I walked down the aisle, I noticed this man waiting to talk to me. He came up and introduced himself as Glenn. And he said, I watched your TED Talk in December, and I have been fighting for climate action in the town where I live, which has about 200,000 people or so, for so long, and nothing was happening. Nothing was changing. But I watched your TED Talk and I decided I need to have conversations. I need to have conversations about why it matters and what we can do about it. So he said, I decided to have conversations and I've kept a list of them. Would you like to see them? I thought, wow, I've never heard this before. Sure. So he reaches into his leather satchel and he pulls out a sheaf of papers. And I was expecting about 70 or 80 names, 6 months, 5 months of conversations. He pulled out a list of 10,000 people. 10,000 people that he had had conversations with, and then they had had conversations with, and then they had had conversations with. And he said, because of that, their city council had just voted to declare a climate emergency. And 2 years later, they voted, this was in the UK, where that's what city councils do. They first vote to declare a climate emergency. Here in the US, it's more like we vote to prepare a climate action plan. That's usually what US cities do. And then 2 years later, they voted to devote 20 million pounds, which for a small town is a lot of money, to their climate action plan. How did it all start? One man, not a famous person, not a rich person, not a powerful or influential person. One man decided to start having conversations. I checked in with him and they're up to over 13,000 names now.
Wow. Okay. Well, I could ask you so many questions and we could talk all night. I have one more question for you. Before we get to that, I just wanted to update our audience on tonight's fundraiser. I'm happy to report that thanks to the generosity of everyone tonight, we have raised over $43,000 tonight, and we are over halfway to our fundraising goal tonight. So thank you all so much for your support and your generous contributions. So with that, I just want to ask my final question. This is a very heavy subject, and you implied this or you inferred this during your presentation. Considering how heavy this subject is and the fear and the anxiety amid these times, with a hefty side of shame and guilt, as you say in your book, could you please give us a little bit more information of what gives you hope from your perspective?
What gives me hope is, first of all, the knowledge that we have from science that our future is in our hands. As the IPCC says, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, who released that big Code Red report this past summer, this is what they conclude. Every year matters, every action matters, every choice matters. We are living in days that will be written about in the history books to come. We are not living in days when everything just kind of coasts calmly down the river. We are living in very turbulent waters. We are living in a time when we have to sink or swim, but the choice is up to ours. And so that's why when I conclude the book, and I should have the book here, here's the book. Of course, it had to be at the bottom of the pile. That's why when I concluded the book, I used a quote from one of my colleagues, whose name is Katharine Wilkinson. She co-edited an amazing book called All We Can Save, a collection of 60 women's voices on climate. And here's what she said. She says, "It is a magnificent thing to be alive in a moment that matters so much." We truly have the ability to change the world. The science is clear that we do. And when we look around, we find hope. Hope is not going to find us. If we just sit there waiting for hope to arrive, just look at any news site. All of the titles on those news sites, all the stories are frustrating, enraging, depressing. Yes, they just make you feel like you want to go crawl into a hole. Yes. Where do we find the hope? By getting out, by talking to people, and by looking for it. When I find hope, I try to share it on social media whenever I do. I find hope in individual people like Glenn. I find hope in the Presbyterian Church in Ireland yesterday who voted to divest from fossil fuels. I find hope in the engine number one that is forcing ExxonMobil to consider a climate resolution. I find hope in all of the elected officials in Washington, D.C. who are trying to pass a budget bill that contains the biggest piece of climate legislation in this decade. So if you want to use your voice now, calling your elected representative is a great thing to do right now. I find hope in my Science Moms organization that anybody can join at sciencemoms.com, because 82% of moms are worried about climate change and they want to fight for their kids' future. So hope is everywhere. It really is. But if we have to go out and look for it, it won't arrive at our doorstep. So read the book. It's got tons of stories of hope. Follow me on social media. I try to share more hope whenever I can. But most of all, use your voice to connect with other people, to talk about why it matters and what we can do. And you will find, as Greta says, that hope is everywhere.
That was the kind of inspiration that I was looking for. Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, thank you so much for your time and for your presentation and for all of your support and all your great work. And thank you to everyone on the call and the audience for your generous support and joining us for the 2021 kickoff, the Party for Clean Power. We just had a Climate Week event last week. So anyways, thank you everyone. That concludes our program. And thank you all so much once again. Have a great night.